Our Bailey was always
Yeah, no, actually.
We actually, guys, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had a student graduate who he would tell us, and he was usually pretty accurate. He'd come in and say, "Well, no, I don't think it's gonna, you know what? I'm gonna go back."
You know what? It was 4 degrees this morning. It's not.
Yeah, it was 4. It's not like it was 2 out or something. Or mine, guys. I remember one winter we had snow all winter long. It had been one cold day after another. We'd had so many delays and e-learning days, and then finally they just stopped. And I remember driving into work one day. We didn't even have a delay, and my car gauge was registering like 10 below. We were in school. So I never know. Okay, so guys, listen. I know some of you are finishing up your bell ringer. I want to review, since you had to read chapter 8 on your own. Hey, phone should be put away right now.
Yeah, Alex. What's the phone?
Listen, folks, I want to review chapter 8 with you since we did not read that together. Hopefully you all read it on your own like you were supposed to.
about that.
You didn't, did you?
I did not.
Okay. All right, listen. So let's talk about the important things that happened in chapter 8. One of the very first things that happens is it snowed. And it had not snowed in Macomb since 1885. So it had been 50 years. It's like 1935. It hadn't snowed for 50 years. Yes. Yes, that happened. But let's talk about some of the other things because of the snow. First of all, what did Mr. Avery tell the kids the reason why it got cold and snowed?
Because the kids were being obedient.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Avery says it's because of bad kids. He said, you children have been bad. That's why it snowed. Okay. What else did they do when it snowed? They made a snowman.
Yeah.
But what was he made out of?
Dirt.
Dirt with a covering of snow. Yes.
Used wood for eyes and nose. I just gotta put the five steps.
Who did it look like?
Mr. Avery.
Yes. And Scout, when she woke up that morning and saw the snow, she starts screaming and tells Atticus what? That the world was ending. She'd never seen snow before. She didn't know what it was. This is a little southern girl. Southern Alabama, guys. They don't get snow very often. Like I said, it'd been 50 years. Jem had never seen it before either. Atticus had rarely been in the snow. But Jem knew what it was. And they even went outside. You know, Scout's like, I want to go outside in it. And she stuck her tongue out to taste it and said it burnt. It was hot, but it was really so cold, you know. So for us, this is like goofy. But for a little southern kid that didn't travel anywhere, yeah, this is strange stuff. Guys, my parents had a series. They had 4 different exchange students over the years. They haven't had one in about 15 or 20 years, something like that. But their last exchange student was a young man from Colombia, South America. And I think he had seen snow maybe once, but not anything of significance. And so he's living with my parents in Indiana for about a year. And I remember Christmas Eve, we were at my aunt's for our Christmas Eve party, and his name was Juan. I'm like, Juan, come here. And we look outside because it's snowing really, really hard. And it just kept piling up and piling up. He had never seen anything like it before. Okay, so I always think of that when I read this section of To Kill a Mockingbird, because people we live here in Indiana, we've experienced snow every year, but for people who haven't seen it, it's quite an experience. Okay, so they build a snowman. They use the snow from Miss Maudie's, from their yard, and they end up with dirt and cover it with snow, and it looks like Mr. Avery. And their father said that they had to do something to disguise it a little bit because it looked a little too much like Mr. Avery. So then they didn't have school because of that. And then that night, what's the other big thing that happened? Yes, Miss Maudie's house burns. Did you understand why Scout and Jim had to come outside of their house? Did you get that part of it? The reasoning why they were outside during the fire? No? They were afraid, they were worried about the fire spreading to the other houses. And so Scout and Jim had to stay out of their house just in case their house also caught fire. And they were watching to see if they were going to have to start moving furniture and stuff out like they did at Miss Maudie's. Okay? That's why Scout and Jim were standing outside in the cold during the fire, because there was a concern that it would spread to the other houses. In fact, they were all like, they had to pat down. They used blankets and stuff and were spraying the other houses around it because there were sparks and embers flying to it. How many of you have heard of the Great Chicago Fire?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, that's what happened in the Great Chicago Fire. There was also a big fire in London back in, was it the 1100s, 1200s, somewhere in there. There was a huge fire in London. There was a fire in Chicago in the early 1900s that spread and spread because the houses were close together. The sparks flew. It's like what's going on with the forest fires. It starts spreading. The winds take it here and there. Okay. So that's what they were concerned about. When Miss Maudie's house burned, there were a couple things. I'd ask you a question about Mr. Avery. Mr. Avery, what happened to him during the fire? He did, because what was he actually got stuck in an upstairs window. He was helping get all the furniture, as much furniture and stuff out of Miss Maudie's as they could to save it. And he's in an upstairs bedroom and he can't get down the stairs anymore. And he gets stuck. Remember, Mr. Avery is always described as having a bit of a belly on him. Okay, they said he was shaped like the snowman. And so he got stuck. To Mr. Avery? Well, okay, but yeah, he got stuck in the window. He finally squeezed himself out, landed in the bushes. Okay, but he was stuck in the window. And then during something they discovered in the morning, Scout, yes, what had Boo done?
Oh yeah, I remember answering that one.
Yep. He actually put it around her and she had no idea. Now, I didn't ask you this question, but what did learning that Boo had put the blanket around Scout lead Jem to do? Do you remember? Hi.
This is your new student.
Okay.
You're showing her around.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I met her about half an hour ago. Hi, Elaine. Okay. And you don't have to be here yet. Okay. Listen,
Sorry, I don't need to. You can show her her other class.
yeah, do
No, we can probably just meet.
Okay, meet her after. Okay. All right. Elaine, right? Okay. So, Elaine, Why don't you sit at this table right here? This is Leah, Julia, Rebecca, Ethan. Wait, did you say, are you in choir? Probably with Leah. What period is it? Is that when you have choir?
Do you have advanced or beginning? I have advanced, yeah.
Okay, all right. So some of your choir mates here. Yeah. We are reading To Kill a Mockingbird.
I've read it.
You've read it. Okay.
Yes.
All right, good. We're just finishing chapter 8. We're getting ready for chapter 9. Okay. Now, there's a copy of it online. I also have paperback copies of it. Would you prefer a paperback copy? Okay. I will get that for you. How long ago did you read it? Just this year?
Yeah. Actually, a couple months ago I read it.
Okay. Well, so you can have a copy. Hopefully everything will be good. Then we won't have to worry about you trying to catch up with what happened. So, okay. All right. And page 2014. Okay. All right, guys. So, listen. So, hey,
Yo, chill out.
Logan, Sarah. All right. So back to this. We're almost done with this chapter. So Boo has put the girls. Boo has put the blanket around Scout, and when they realize this, Jim, that they're sitting at breakfast, and Jim does what? It leads him to. You remember this? He starts confessing everything that's happened, everything they've kept from their father about Boo Radley and the things that were left in the knothole and all of this stuff. It just all spills out of him because he's afraid that if they take the blanket back, that Boo is going to get in trouble. So what does that tell us about Jim at this point? Is he always just thinking about himself? No, because he doesn't want Boo to get in trouble, so he risks himself getting into trouble by confessing everything that's been going on and telling his father, we can't take it back, I don't want him to get in trouble, this is what happened with the knothole and all of this stuff, and he's really afraid that Boo will get in trouble with his older brother Nathan, okay, who now takes care of Boo, because both parents are gone. All right, so that's where chapter 2 ends. Okay, so let's go ahead and start chapter 8. I said chapter 2. Let's go ahead and get into chapter 9. And guys, again, if we don't finish reading it, you'll have to read the rest of it on your own. Okay. Did you guys read it on your own, or did your teacher read some of it too?
I read it as a personal book.
Oh, okay.
I'm a really strong reader.
Oh, good. Okay. Very quickly. I'm going to go ahead and start reading, though, Balin. Oh, my gosh. Now. No, you can't. Thank you.
I still got
Wait,
No.
is it coming back?
We need to convert this whole mess.
Logan? This is fair.
Yeah, right.
You're going to present or something today? Okay. Maybe take your stuff just in case. Okay. All right. All right. So, chapter 9. So you read it on your own. Okay. All right. Good.
This is one of my favorite books.
Good. Oh. Right. We need to try and remind them. Okay, boys. What?
They're high schoolers.
Yeah. All right. Listen. Chapter 9. Okay, guys. I'm just gonna tell you something. They use the N word a lot in this chapter, and I've told you before I'm not comfortable saying it, so I'm not going to say it. You can just take that back, boy. Hiccup right now. Hiccup. I want to hear you hiccup. Come on, hiccup. Who was hiccuping? Jaden, I want you to hiccup right now. Hiccup. Come on, hiccup. I want to hiccup. I want to hear it. Are they gone? I think. Okay. I'll only work once with you. Hey, leave it open just a little bit. Let her she was called out.
I'm
Sorry.
doing it to embarrass you, so it goes away.
No, it just like puts you, I don't know,
Like
it
on
only
the
works
spot.
once. Yeah, puts you on the spot, it only works once. Okay, all right. Shh. Hey, Bailey, we do not need the phone. Okay, ladies, gentlemen. Shh. Okay. This order given by me to Cecil Jacobs was the beginning of a rather thin time for Jem and me. Now, when she says thin time, she's meaning not a good, it was a tough time for them. They called it a thin time, but it's a tough time. This is going to be hard. Remember I told you, guys, please focus up here. Remember I told you that Atticus is going to, part of the story is that Atticus is going to be handling a case where a black man is accused of something that he didn't do. And yes, of raping a white woman. And so Atticus is the one defending him. My fists were clenched and I was ready to let fly. Atticus had promised me he would wear me out if he ever heard of me fighting anymore. I was far too old and too big for such childish things, and the sooner I learned to hold in, the better off everybody would be. I soon forgot. Cecil Jacobs made me forget. He had announced in the schoolyard before that Scout Finch's daddy defended black people. I denied it, but told Jem. What do you mean saying that? I asked. Nothing, said Jem, or Jem said. Ask Atticus, he'll tell you. Do you defend black men, Atticus? I asked him that evening. Of course I do. And don't say that word, Scout. That's common. It's what everybody at school says. From now on, it'll be everybody less one. So he's telling her, you will not use that word. Well, if you don't want me to grow up talking that way, why do you send me to school? Remember, she's like 7. My father looked at me mildly, amusement in his eyes. Despite our compromise, my campaign to avoid school had continued in one form or another since my first day's dose of it. The beginning of last September had brought on sinking spells, dizziness, and mild gastric complaints. I went so far as to pay a nickel for the privilege of rubbing my head against the head of Miss Rachel's cook's son, who was afflicted with a tremendous ringworm. It didn't take. So she's trying to get sick. She's trying to do everything she can to avoid school. Because remember, Sarah, you need to be paying attention up here. Yeah. And Bailey, you need to put your phone away. So remember, Scout's a very, very smart young lady and can read and write and everything, which kind of makes school difficult for her, oddly. Okay, we talked about that in the beginning. But I was worrying another bone. Do all lawyers defend Negroes, Atticus? Of course they do, Scout. Then why did Cecil say you defended, use the other word? He made it sound like you were running a still. Atticus sighed. I'm simply defending a Negro. His name's Tom Robinson. He lives in that little settlement beyond the town dump. He's a member of Calpurnia's church, and Cal knows his family well. She says they're clean-living folks. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet, but there's been some high talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man. It's a peculiar case. It won't come to trial until summer session. John Taylor was kind enough to give us a postponement. If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it? For a number of reasons, said Atticus. Guys, this is important. This part is really, really important to the story. The main one is, if I didn't, I couldn't hold up my head in town. I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. I couldn't even tell you or Jem to do something again. So think about that understanding. Other people, he's doing a difficult thing. He's in this southern town, in this southern state, defending a black man. In a town where everybody's telling him he shouldn't worry about it, he shouldn't do this. But Atticus understands and feels that this is his duty. This is what he's supposed to do. And it's not just a duty, but it's the right thing to do as a human being, is to defend this man. And if he didn't do it, he feels that he would not be able to tell his children how to behave. It's his moral obligation, it's his moral duty to defend this man, is what he's saying. You mean if you didn't defend that man, Jem and me wouldn't have to mind you anymore? That's about right. Why? Because I could never ask you to mind me again. Scout, simply by the nature of the work, every lawyer gets at least one case in his lifetime that affects him personally. This one's mine, I guess. You might hear some ugly talk about it at school, but do one thing for me, if you will. You just hold your head high and keep those fists down. No matter what anybody says to you, don't you let them get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning. Atticus, are we going to win it? No, honey. Then why? Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us not to try to win, Atticus said. So Atticus knows he's going to lose this case, not because the man is guilty, because the man isn't guilty, and you're going to see that plainly, but because he is a black man in the 1930s in the South being accused of a crime by a white woman. And the jurors are going to be all white men. And he knows that no matter what he says, no matter what he proves, this man is pretty much going to be convicted of this crime that he did not commit. The evidence is going to be clear that he did not commit it. But it's not going to matter, unfortunately. You sound like Cousin Ike Finch, I said. Cousin Ike Finch was Macomb County's sole surviving Confederate veteran. He wore a General Hood type beard, of which he was inordinately vain. At least once a year, Atticus, Jem, and I called on him, and I would have to kiss him. It was horrible. Jem and I would listen respectfully to Atticus, and Cousin Ike rehash the war. Tell you, Atticus, Cousin Ike would say, the Missouri Compromise was what licked us, but if I had to go through it again, I'd walk every step of the way there and every step back, just like I did before. And furthermore, we'd whip him this time. Now, in 1864, when Stonewall Jackson came around by, I beg your pardon, young folks, old Blue Light was in heaven then, God rest his saintly brow. So guys, they actually have a relative who was old enough that he fought in the Civil War. So remember, he must be pretty old at this point, but still, he's still around. How many of you have a grandfather that might have fought in World War II? Okay, was it your grandfather or great-grandfather?
It was my grandpa.
Okay, and how old is he?
He passed away recently,
Okay,
a few years ago.
okay. What about Bailey? You said yours is still alive?
Yeah. I haven't talked to him like a year and a half ago. He's usually like, I never get to see him until like,
Okay,
he's like, I need over like 90.
probably. Now, is it your grandfather or your great-grandfather?
Okay.
Great-father. Ethan, what about you?
My grandfather.
Your
I
grandfather?
don't know. I don't know.
Okay, he's still living though?
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably in his 90s. If he fought in World War II, he's probably in his 90s. My grandfather, I've told you this before, fought in World War I.
What?
Yeah,
Oh my
and that
Lord.
was unusual for somebody of my generation. I had a classmate in high school whose grandfather, we were unusual. And our grandfathers had fought in World War I. Most of them was like World War II. But my grandpa, it was my mom's father. He was in his mid to late 40s when my mother was born. Grandpa was born in 1895. And so, yeah, my grandpa, what's even crazier is that my youngest cousin, first cousin, is my mom's younger brother's son. He's 19 years younger than me, and his grandfather fought in World War I. He never knew him. Grandpa died before, when I was 7. And my youngest siblings and my younger cousins weren't born when he passed away. But Yeah, think about that. Here's this relative of theirs that fought in the Civil War. Come here, Scout, said Atticus. I crawled into his lap and tucked my head, girls, under his chin. He put his arms around me and rocked me gently. It's different this time, he said. This time we aren't fighting the Yankees. We're fighting our friends. But remember this, no matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends, and this is still our home. So he's warning them that everybody, most of the people in the town are not going to agree with what Atticus is doing. But you have to remember that they are still our friends, and this is still our home. With this in mind, I faced Cecil Jacobs in the schoolyard next day. You gonna take that back, boy? You gotta make me first, he yelled. My folks said your daddy was a disgrace, and that black man ought to hang from the water tank. I drew a bead on him, remembered what Atticus had said, then dropped my fists and walked away. Scout's a coward, ringing in my ears. It was the first time I ever walked away from a fight. Somehow, if I fought Cecil, I would let Atticus down. Atticus so rarely asked Jim and me to do something for him, I could take being called a coward for him. I felt extremely noble for having remembered and remained noble for 3 weeks. Then Christmas came and disaster struck. For 3 weeks, she's able to not fight no matter what they're saying because her father asked her to. Okay? And their father, I mean, this tells us a lot of things about their father. What kind of a person he was, and his relationship with his children. He's never not just been honest with them about how things are. And that's a good relationship to have. In some ways, I mean, they're his children, but he also treats them a little bit like they're adults. He tells them what he thinks they're mature enough to handle. So now it's Christmas. She's avoided fighting for 3 weeks, but disaster is going to strike again. Hey, Bailey and Sarah, pay attention up here, please. Jim and I viewed Christmas with mixed feelings. The good side was the tree and Uncle Jack Finch. Every Christmas Eve day, we met Uncle Jack at Macomb Junction, and he would spend a week with us. A flip of the coin revealed the uncompromising lineaments of Aunt Alexandra and Frances. Alexandra is Atticus and Jack's sister. She's the one she and her family are the ones that live on Finch Landing, the plantation that the family used to own, or still owns. I suppose I should include Uncle Jimmy, Aunt Alexandra's husband, but as he never spoke a word to me in my life except to say, get off the fence once, I never saw any reason to take notice of him. Neither did Aunt Alexandra. So what does that tell you about her relationship with her husband if she doesn't take any notice of him? I mean, probably not a great relationship. Long ago, in a burst of friendliness, Auntie and Uncle Jimmy produced a son named Henry in a burst of friendliness, who left home as soon as it was humanly possible, married and produced Frances. Henry and his wife deposited Frances at his grandparents' every Christmas, then pursued their own pleasures. So Frances is actually the son of their cousin. So he's still their cousin, but once removed, that's how you say it. Remember, Atticus was quite a bit older when Jim and Scout were born. No amount of sighing could induce Atticus to let us spend Christmas Day at home. We went to Finch's Landing every Christmas in my memory. The fact that Auntie was a good cook was some compensation for being forced to spend a religious holiday with Francis Hancock. He was a year older than I, and I avoided him on principle. He enjoyed everything I disapproved of and disliked my ingenuous diversions. Aunt Alexandra was Atticus's sister, but when Jem told me about changelings and siblings, I decided she had been swapped at birth, though my grandparents had perhaps received a Crawford instead of a Finch. So she's very different, apparently, from Atticus and Jack. Had I ever harbored the mystical notions about mountains that seem to obsess lawyers and judges, Aunt Alexandra would have been analogous to Mount Everest. Throughout my early life, she was cold and there. When Uncle Jack jumped down from the train Christmas Eve day, we had to wait for the porter to hand him 2 long packages. Jim and I always thought it funny when Uncle Jack pecked Atticus on the cheek. They were the only 2 men we ever saw kiss each other. Well, they're brothers. He was kissing him in greeting. Okay? On the cheek. Uncle Jack shook hands with Jim and swung me high, but not high enough. Uncle Jack was a head shorter than Atticus, the baby of the family. He was younger than Aunt Alexandra. He and Auntie looked alike, but Uncle Jack made better use of his face. Oh. Yeah. We were never wary of his sharp nose and chin. He was one of the few men of science who never terrified me, probably because he never behaved like a doctor. Remember, Jack's a doctor, Atticus is a lawyer, and Alexandra runs the farm. Whenever he performed a minor service for Jim and me, as removing a splinter from a foot, he would tell us exactly what he was going to do, give us an estimation of how much it would hurt, and explain the use of any tongs he employed. One Christmas, I lurked in corners, nursing a twisted splinter in my foot, permitting no one to come near me. When Uncle Jack caught me, he kept me laughing about a preacher who hated going to church so much that every day he stood at his gate in his dressing gown, smoking a hookah and delivering 5-minute sermons to any passers-by who desired spiritual comfort. I interrupted to make Uncle Jack let me know when he would pull it out, but he held up a bloody splinter and a pair of tweezers and said he yanked it while I was laughing. That was what was known as relativity. What's in those packages? I asked him, pointing to the long, thin parcels the porter had given him. None of your business, he said. Jim said, how's Rose Almer? Rose Almer was Uncle Jack's cat. She was a beautiful yellow female, Uncle Jack said was one of the few women he could stand permanently. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out some snapshots. We admired them. She's getting fat, I said. I should think so. She eats all the leftover fingers and ears from the hospital. He's just kidding. That's a damn story, I said. I beg your pardon? Atticus said, don't pay any attention to her, Jack. She's trying you out. Cal says she's been cussing fluently for a week now. So she's just trying out curse words. Uncle Jack raised his eyebrows and said nothing. I was proceeding on the dim theory, aside from the innate attractiveness of such words, that if Atticus discovered I had picked them up at school, he wouldn't make me go. Remember, this is another one of her schemes to try and get to stay home. But at supper that evening, when I asked him to pass the damn ham, please, Uncle Jack pointed at me. See me afterwards, young lady, he said. When supper was over, Uncle Jack went to the living room and sat down. He slapped his thighs for me to come sit on his lap. I liked to smell him. He was like a bottle of alcohol and something pleasantly sweet. He pushed back my bangs and looked at me. You're more like Atticus than your mother, he said. You're also growing out of your pants a little. I reckon they fit all right. You like words like damn and hell now, don't you? I said, I reckon so. Well, I don't, said Uncle Jack, not unless there's extreme provocation connected with them. I'll be here a week and I don't want to hear any words like that while I'm here. Scout, you'll get in trouble if you go around saying things like that. You want to grow up to be a lady, don't you? I said, not particularly. Of course you do. Now let's get to the tree. We decorated the tree until bedtime, and that night I dreamed of the 2 long packages for Jem and me. Next morning, Jem and I dived for them. They were from Atticus, who had written Uncle Jack to get them for us, and they were what we had asked for. Don't point them in the house, said Atticus, when Jem aimed at a picture on the wall. You'll have to teach him to shoot, said Uncle Jack. That's your job, said Atticus. I merely bowed to the inevitable. So it's probably BB guns. Like, maybe Red Ryder ones like Ralphie got in A Christmas Story. It took Atticus's courtroom voice to drag us away from the tree. He declined to let us take our air rifles, okay, which is like a BB rifle, right? They're pretty much the same thing. I think, okay.
Very soft, yeah.
Yeah, okay. He declined to let us take our air rifles to the landing. I had already begun to think of shooting Francis. And if we made one false move, he'd take them away from us for good. I told you the story about my father and his bow and arrow that he got for Christmas. No? My father was born in 1940, so he would have been younger than these people. But he was probably 9 or 10 years old. He got a bow and arrow for Christmas. And he lived in town, not here in Knox, but in a town called Elwood. And there was an empty lot in their neighborhood where all the neighbor kids would play, but it's also where everybody put their dead Christmas trees. And they had built a fort out of dead Christmas trees. And the neighborhood kids were playing cowboys and Indians in the fort of dead Christmas trees. My dad had taken the trash out for his mother to burn it. And he thought, oh, flaming arrows.
Oh, no.
And he got a piece of a rag, tied it to the end of one of his new arrows, dipped it in the burning trash and set it on fire and shot it right into the dead Christmas tree fort. And what do you think happened?
Lit up.
Yep, exactly, Ethan. It went whoosh. Yeah, it lit up. Okay. And kids are screaming and running out of nobody was hurt, but my grandmother got several phone calls later that day about how her hooligan son almost killed their babies, you know. So.
About this in the speech.
Yes, I knew I told some class. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't hear her talk about that.
Probably not paying attention.
I probably wasn't paying attention.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So Scout has ideas of shooting Francis with the air rifle. Okay.
That's one of my mom's names.
Francis. Finch's Landing. What time is it? Okay. All right. Finch's Landing consisted of 366 steps down a high bluff ending in a jetty. Farther downstream beyond the bluff were traces of an old cotton landing where Finch slaves had loaded bales and produce, unloaded blocks of ice, flour and sugar, farm equipment, and feminine apparel. A two-rut road ran from the riverside and vanished among dark trees. At the end of the road was a two-storied white house with porches circling it upstairs and downstairs. In his old age, our ancestor Simon Finch had built it to please his nagging wife, but with the porches all resemblance to ordinary houses of its era ended. The internal arrangements of the Finch house were indicative of Simon's guilelessness and the absolute trust with which he regarded his offspring. There were 6 bedrooms upstairs, 4 for the 8 female children, 1 for Welcome Finch, the sole son, and 1 for visiting relatives. Simple enough. But the daughters' rooms could be reached only by one staircase. Welcome's room and the guest room only by another. The daughter's staircase was in the ground floor bedroom of their parents, so Simon always knew the hours of his daughter's nocturnal comings and goings. What a smart thing to do. You put the stairs to your daughter's bedrooms in your bedroom. That's the only way they could access it. That's kind of crazy.
Oh.
There was a kitchen separate from the rest of the house, tacked onto it by a wooden catwalk. In the backyard was a rusty bell on a pole used to summon field hands or as a distress signal. A widow's walk was on the roof, but no widow's walk there. From it, Simon oversaw his overseer, watched the riverboats, and gazed into the lives of surrounding landholders. There went with the house the usual legend about the Yankees. One Finch female recently engaged donned her complete trousseau to save it from raiders in the neighborhood. She became stuck in the door to the daughter's staircase, but was doused with water and finally pushed through. He arrived at the landing. Aunt Alexandra kissed Uncle Jack. Francis kissed Uncle Jack. Uncle Jimmy shook hands silently with Uncle Jack. Jim and I gave our presents to Francis, who gave us a present. Jim felt his age and gravitated to the adults, leaving me to entertain our cousin Francis. Francis was 8 and slicked back his hair. "What'd you get for Christmas?" I asked politely. "Just what I asked for," he said. Francis had requested a pair of knee pants, a red leather book sack, 5 shirts, and an untied bow tie. Do you think that's really what Francis asked for Christmas? No, probably not. "That's nice," I lied. "Jim and me got air rifles, and Jim got a chemistry set. A toy one, I reckon." "No, a real one. He's going to make me some invisible ink, and I'm going to write to Dill in it." Francis asked what was the use of that. "Well, can't you just see his face when he gets a letter from me with nothing in it? It'll drive him nuts." That sounds fun, actually. Talking to Francis gave me the sensation of settling slowly to the bottom of the ocean. He was the most boring child I had ever met. As he lived in Mobile, he could not inform me on me to school authorities. He managed to tell everything he knew to Aunt Alexandra, who in turn unburdened herself to Atticus, who either forgot it or gave me hell, whichever struck his fancy. But the only time I ever heard Atticus speak sharply to anyone was when I once heard him say, "Sister, I do the best I can with them." It had something to do with my going around in overalls. Guys, we're going to have to stop here. You need to finish reading chapter 9. You have about 10 pages left to read. Chapter 9 is a longer chapter, so finish reading it.
Do you really think we're gonna be reading it?
Well, I can always hope.
Always read.
Yeah.